All righty, welcome here, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to celebrate Heather's book, Where Tenderness Lives. We're so excited to have it out in the world. This was truly another labor of love. I had the privilege of getting lots of texts from Heather, both joyful and agonizing, and I've changed another chapter and I've added another chapter, and I don't know about this one anymore, and I don't know what the editor was thinking, but I don't know if I can handle this. What am I doing? Books are a whole thing, and you have no idea what it's all about until you get to work with an author. So we're really excited for Heather to put out another book into the world. Our goal at the center is that Heather will be putting out books regularly, so there will be more to come, as always. So today we have about 90 minutes planned. So if you do need to drop out at any time, that's totally okay. Feel free to just sort of say goodbye in the chat, and we may or may not be able to say goodbye to you. But yeah, don't feel obligated to stay for the whole 90 minutes. However, we will be doing some draws and some giveaways throughout the course of our call. So we'd love if you did stay for the whole thing. We're going to do a draw for a spot in our Know Yourself for Yourself course. We're going to do a draw for a signed copy of Where Tenderness Lives. And we are going to do a draw for a little coaching session with Heather. So your name will go into that draw. And actually, Emily, if you wouldn't mind, sorry, I'm putting Emily a bunch on the spot. If you wouldn't mind collecting the names for me, that would be super helpful. Thanks so much. Oh, and Mary's here too, so I can call on her when I need to on occasion too. It's good to have a big team because you can kind of call out people as we go. As you may have noticed in the chat, everyone is sort of popping in to let us know where you're from. You may continue to do that as well. Please, however, don't put questions in the chat unless we invite you to for Heather. We will have a time where you can ask her anything, but the chat can get a little bit overwhelming. So if you could be a little bit judicious in your use of the chat, that would be super helpful for all of us. And I think that's it. And it feels right because this is what we do here at the center, to open with a bell. So I am going to ring a bell and ring us in and let us all settle into this time of celebration and conversation together. If I can find the correct settings. One moment. There we go. Let me ring us in. So I will pass this off to our woman of the hour, or the hour and a half, Heather, and she is going to talk a little bit about the book, a bit about the process, offer some reflections, do some readings, and we have lots of good stuff for you. So Heather, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. I have to tell you, I'm getting a little emotional every time I do something like this, and all the faces pop up and remind me of the different courses I've run, the different travels I've done, the friendships I've had, the ways that I've been able to connect with people all over the world. Some of you are in Europe, some in the US and Costa Rica, different places that I've done work. And there's even people that are up in the middle of the night in Australia and New Zealand that are must have set their alarms to come join us. And that just delights me in so many ways. You can't know how meaningful it is to do this work that feels really important and sometimes feels like solitary work and sometimes feels isolated because I have to do this deep excavation on my own with my computer. And yet when I show up, there are these people that are willing to hold it with me and support it and love it. And that feels beyond words meaningful for me. And so First of all, I want to say that thank you for showing up. And just to say a few words about the book, I'm going to do a couple of readings from it later in the call, but to start off with, this book, I think, is fairly unique. It's really fairly different from my first book. My first book feels like the book that other people wanted me to write, because a lot of people were asking for something on holding space. And after the blog post I wrote went viral, so a lot of people were calling for that book. And so, it felt like something outside of me wanting that book to be born. And then this one felt quite different. It felt like something inside of me wanting this book to be born. It felt like something that really, really wanted to be said. And it's hard to describe exactly what that feels like. If you aren't a writer, I always have a bit of a hard time explaining um, this kind of writer's pull to be saying something that's on your heart, and to put it onto the page and put it into the world, even though it's risky and even though it's really, really personal. This book feels really personal in ways that I haven't written before. Like, there are some stories that I share that I haven't said out loud before. And so sometimes when people ask me, why did you write such a personal book? Why do you expose so much of yourself? And I have to say, when they're asking it out of love. They're not asking it out of critique, most of the questions that I get. But I've had to explore that question of, why am I doing that? And I was having this conversation a couple of months ago with a couple of friends. And my friend Michael, who's an avid gardener, helped me frame it in a different way. And he said to me, it's a kind of like a gardener. Like, we love to share the bounty of our garden. We work so hard on the garden. We cultivate it. We nourish the soil. We weed the garden. We make sure it gets plenty of light. All these things, we put this love into the garden. And then we want to share from the garden. And it's not just the harvest. It is some of that, but almost most importantly, it's the seeds from that garden. When we grow something, we want somebody else to be able to grow their own garden. We just feel this. And so he said that your book is like offering somebody a seed. It's like passing seeds from your own garden so that somebody else can grow something. And that just landed so beautifully for me, that this book feels like a seed that I want to pass to you. And I want you to be able to plant something in your own garden to grow something beautiful. And that, if I hear from you, if I hear those stories of how it's growing in your garden, that's what's going to make it all feel really, really meaningful and alive for me. So just by virtue of you showing up today, that makes it feel supported, like you're willing to, and you're working on your own gardens and want to grow it from whatever I extend to you. And I also trust that you will then extend from your garden to other people's gardens, that this will be propagated, and the gardens we grow will continue around the world. So in launching this book, even though it's a solitary process sometimes, it can't happen without being held, I'm not a solitary person doing this work alone. And a book can't be born unless it has a container to be born into, and midwives who help birth it. And so before I do some of the readings of the book, I wanted to invite a few of those voices to speak. People who have, in one way or another, been of support to me as this book was being written, but also this work that I do was being birthed. And I don't have time for all of the voices. There are many others on this call that I could invite to speak, but I've invited a select few to say a few words. And some of them have very specifically supported some aspect of the book. And so I'm going to start. The first person I'm going to invite is Lorraine. My dear friends, Lorraine and Two Bears, who you probably have heard me make reference to, beloved friends who hosted me in their home to complete the writing of the first book, The Art of Holding Space, and have really offered me so much blessing in terms of holding a container for my work and supporting and cheerleading the work. Two Bears isn't able to be here today, but Lorraine is here to offer a blessing for the book. And so I'm going to invite her first to speak. Over to Lorraine.
Oh, thank you. First, I want to say the stone that I picked up walking by on my way to this seat today says inspire. And that is so what Heather and Krista are about. So I put that in here, and I'm going to read a little bit of a prayer, or just thinking about what it's like, this where tenderness lives. And I ask if any of you have a candle and would like to light it. I invite you to do that. It's okay if you don't. There's lots of flames and fire in our tummies that are here as we gather. And I begin with, we invoke the blessings of the four directions and our helping guides. We invoke the blessings of the spirit guidance of where tenderness lives. We invoke the spirit of the opening of the pathway of this book and the truth that opens in our hearts and in our world. And we are grateful for the three tenderness homes: safety, belonging, and identity. Aho.
Thank you, Lorraine. The next voice I want to invite into the circle is Mary. And much like Lorraine and Two Bears, Mary hosted my writing. Mary lives in Costa Rica, has a farm in Costa Rica, and she showed up in the book a little bit. You'll hear a little bit of her voice when you read the book. And it was at Mary's house that something new I was writing, and she has a rancho, which is basically I don't know how you describe a rancho, Mary, but a backyard kind of gazebo. And I spent my days writing there for a couple of weeks. And it was there that the book kind of shifted shape. I knew I was writing a memoir. I knew it was about excavating my own stories. I thought it was about this transition period in my life with my children growing up and moving out of the house. And then all of a sudden, what emerged while I was there in conversations with Mary, but also in her rancho, was that I needed to bring in this story that I'd written about the girl in the Velcro dress. And some of you will remember that. And I've ended up putting that in the prologue and the epilogue about this story, about revealing about this dress that we have, that each of us adopts, and people put things on our Velcro clothing. And you can find out more about that in the book. So Mary was host to that emergence, and also to the conversations that helped it emerge. So I'm going to pass the talking piece over to Mary for that.
Thanks so much, Heather, and greetings, everyone, and shout out to the people from the Foundations program, past and present. And I'm sorry, all of a sudden there's some yelling in the background here. Sorry about that. Thought it was going to be quiet. Can you hear the yelling? Okay, go Zoom. Oh, and congratulations, Heather. This is such a beautiful gift you're giving to the world. And I read it, I read a version of it when I was in Japan in the fall, and was so struck at your ability to really speak your truth and also uphold honor and dignity of other people in your stories. And yeah, that really struck me. And I want to offer a blessing today. A blessing for where tenderness lives and those arriving. So I will put it in the chat if anybody along with it. Oh shoot, sorry, it's too long. Blessing for where tenderness lives and those arriving. May this book, in all its versions, print, electronic, audio, reach the people it needs to reach. May the stories and invitations in this book lead us to feel the warmth of Heather's friendship as she accompanies us in our reading and exploration. May the stories and invitations in this book speak to us so that we can see ourselves. May we have the courage to be true to our full selves, even in the complications and challenges that arise in others' truths and stories. May the stories and invitations in this book serve us as we reshape each of our hard things into our unique stories. May we be inspired to write and rewrite, narrate and re-narrate, listen and re-listen to our stories until we have our own cohesive narratives that unveil new meaning. And may that new meaning hold, soothe, heal, and free us. And may that new meaning we uncover help us wake up and carry on into new stories in our lives. May we all learn how to hold space for ourselves and engage in our individual healing so that we can connect with the collective healing that promotes liberation, tenderness, and wholeness for all. May we all become and reside in a place where tenderness lives.
Thank you so much, Mary. That's really beautiful. And I think I'm going to want to post it on social media later, if you don't mind that. The next voice I want to invite in is Trina. Trina is one of the co-owners of Page Two, the publishing company I've been working with for both of my books. After publishing The Art of Holding Space with them, I just had such a beautiful nurturing experience of birthing a book. They really are beautiful midwives. I think it's partly because they're a woman-owned business that knows how to hold the birthing of a book. And so it didn't take much to decide the second time around to work again with Page Two. And so Trina, I want to invite, you're not on my first screen, but I know you're on here somewhere. I want to invite you into the conversation.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you. And I'm here today from Huisam, also known as Roberts Creek, which is where you and I first met, Heather. It's this very small community on the west coast of Canada, 3,000 people, and Heather happened to be running a retreat here. And we met maybe 6 or 7 years ago to first talk about the art of holding space. And I just have to say, it's been an absolute privilege to walk beside you and to have the opportunity to help get your beautiful words and wisdom out into the world in this way. And with Where Tenderness Lives, it's such an incredibly brave and personal story. And it's really been an honor for me and my whole team to support you on this path. And I would say one of the real joys of being a book publisher is that I learn so much from my authors, and every day I'm learning from my authors and the work that they bring into the world. And with Heather, that learning has been so profound. Just as I know everybody on this call has been touched deeply by your work, I've really learned so much from you, Heather, about compassion, courage, of course, holding space, having open, honest, sometimes challenging conversations, and you do it with so much grace and integrity. So I just really want to thank you for our relationship and our partnership, and giving us the chance to help you, deliver this incredible work into the world in this way.
Thank you, Trina. And thank you. I know at least one other member of your team, Adrina, is on the call. Adrina has been really instrumental in managing the whole process, and to the whole team. I'm just really pleased with what it's been like to work with this team again. One more voice I want to invite in, and that is my beloved friend Salia. I asked her very last minute, and so I really put her on the spot to say something, but I felt like I couldn't quite do this without her voice in it, because through the whole process, the excavation process, Salia was usually the person that was helping me unravel it all. And we've had so many deep conversations over the years about exactly what I was writing about. And so she feels like a really integral part of the whole book being born. She was really a constant midwife for me. And so Salia, I'm going to invite you to speak.
Oh my God, Heather, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Hi, everybody. Hi, Krista. It's good to see you. It's like I met Heather 7 years ago, and it was such an interesting meeting. It was such an interesting way to get to see her and to get to meet her. I didn't know about her work until after I met her, which was very interesting. So we met in a very unusual way, but it still is a very unusual friendship that we're having together, but not in a bad way. It's a very good, secure attachment that we're having together, and we're experiencing a lot of healing together. And I think it's one of the blessings that really we have. So we can just talk about a lot of things from a very different perspective. We don't work together, but yet we work on ourselves together. And I'm just so proud of you. I'm so happy for you. So happy for you. I always said like how you're doing things very gracefully and in a very courageous way as well. And I always respected that. And I agree with everybody, like when they said, telling the story with holding the integrity also for the other party or the other characters of the story. And I think I said that to you when I read the first version, and then I was crying in some chapters. I was happy in other chapters. I connected with you so many different ways, and we had a lot of conversations about that. And I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing every day, waking up in the morning and doing all this for everybody else and for yourself as well. Thank you for being part of my world, and thank you for putting this out there. Appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you so much. I feel like I couldn't have written some of the chapters without the deep conversations that we had in the process. So that's, like I say, I could name other people, but with this call could take a long time. I do want to just mention that we also, Krista and I, have a beautiful team of support people at the center who also support the work and support more and more of the teaching so that I can go off and do the writing. And so Mary and Lucy and Emily and Nam and Yvonne, thank you to you for all that you do to support the work. And then also the people who host me when I travel, who are inviting me to their countries. Brenda, I think, is on the call. I don't know if, I think Fanny is on the call, has hosted me recently in Belgium, and Frankie, and there's others, Kelly in the past in New Zealand, and Mary in Costa Rica. And so different people are also creating environments where I can come to teach. And so they are also an important part of the work continuing to grow. So yeah, with that, I think I'm going to shift into now actually reading a piece from the book. And so it was hard to select what passages to read, but I decided the first selection that I'm going to read is from a chapter called Faith and Flotation. And it's really about the exploration of what it meant to grow up Mennonite, to grow up in a particular religious context that isn't very well known to other people, but is very much alive in me. And so the exploration of that, and how that shaped me and who I am, and then the deconstruction of my faith so that I could find the nugget of what wanted to live in me as a faith narrative. And an important part of that story, whose voice would probably be on this call if he were still alive is my beloved friend Randy. And many of you will have heard me speak of Randy. Sadly, he died last year. He had ALS, and I had this beautiful opportunity to walk with him in his dying time, to be in regular conversation with him during that process. And so I wrote the end of the chapter on faith is about Randy, and so I want to read that portion. And I was able to record myself reading this portion on video and send it to Randy before he died. So I was happy to be able to share some of what he had helped to shape in me before he died. And because I'm getting old, I now have to put on my reading glasses. My friend Randy, and by the way, I wrote it before he died, so it sounds like he's still alive, but he is not, sadly. My friend Randy holds a PhD in Jungian studies and retired a few years ago from his career as a United Church minister. For the last 15 or so years, Randy has offered me a glimpse into what a liberated faith without all the baggage that I once carried might look like. When I grew tired of a masculine-only version of God, Randy loaned me books from his library about the feminine divine. When I was trembling in front of the elder board speaking out in support of same-sex marriage, Randy had already officiated at same-sex weddings. When I was in a period of deconstruction, I asked Randy how he understood these words of Jesus that are tightly held by evangelical and fundamentalist Christians. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He offered an expanded definition of the way, suggesting that Jesus never meant for it to be so narrowly focused that it turned him into an ideology. It's one of the most misused passages from the Bible, he said. Almost everywhere I needed to go in the evolution of my faith, Randy had already been. He shone the light on my path without holding any attachment to whether or not I chose the same path as he had. He would have failed my evangelism class at Bible college. No matter what I chose to believe, I could always count on Randy's love. Randy phoned me a few months before I wrote the original version of this chapter to tell me that he was diagnosed with ALS and was expecting to die in the not too distant future. At the time of this writing, he'd already become confined to a wheelchair and his speech was beginning to slur. He'd signed the papers for medically assisted dying, and when he could no longer communicate and his care would become too much of a burden for his family, Randy planned to release himself from this life on his own terms. Randy lived in Nova Scotia, so I couldn't visit him easily or take him out for any of the long drives in the countryside that were once a treasured part of our relationship. Instead, we committed to a conversation over Zoom every couple of weeks until the time came when communication would be impossible. Even as he was dying, Randy was teaching me about faith. Though he once lived a large and adventurous life, traveling all over the world, Randy was not bitter about the fact that he was now confined to the ground floor and would likely never again visit the kitchen of his own house or his home office where all the mementos of his career and lifelong love of travel were on display. Because he was especially vulnerable in the middle of a pandemic, few people could visit him, and he couldn't see his grandchildren at Christmas. And yet, Randy was remarkably at peace, and my conversations with him were some of the most joyful and easy conversations that I've had with anyone. He told me he'd laughed more in the last 6 months since his diagnosis than he remembers laughing in his lifetime. He said that in his time in ministry, he had met many people who were dying, and some were joyful and at peace, while others were resistant and angry. He was choosing to end his days at peace, with his faith and his contemplative prayer practice helping him to find that peace. When I asked about the source of his peace, Randy said that he believed his soul would live on after he was finished with his body, and so his death would simply be a change of address and way of being. He didn't use any of the language of heaven that I grew up with and simply saw himself held in the embrace of a loving divine who never threatened to abandon him to hell for anything he did while on earth. There was no trauma bond in his faith. As a result, his final days did not hold any of the anguish that was part of my mom's experience when she feared that her grandchildren might never join her on the other side. This unconditional love and untethered peace that I witnessed in Randy helped me heal and grow in the years after I left the church and my marriage. This spirit is now woven into my work, offering people what I have always longed for, a space where love, safety, and belonging are not dependent on their faith, identity, ideology, or adherence to a doctrine or set of rules. Today, my faith is not tethered to an ideology or a certain definition of God. I remain open to the version of the divine that Randy cherished, and I find there is comfort in believing that a higher power is available to me, one who holds me when I'm sad or lost, and who will continue to hold me even after my body is buried in the ground. That version of God is not shrouded in guilt or shame or expectations. It doesn't demand of me martyrdom or self-flagellation and doesn't require that I convert anyone to a certain dogma. Instead, it offers liberation and love. I now often refer to the divine as mystery because I no longer have a clear definition of what or who it is. I experience mystery as the presence that I feel when I wander through the woods or along the shore and listen to birdsong. It's what I feel when I stand eye to eye with a deer and know that we are connected. It's what I knew to be present whenever I spent time with Randy or others whose love is not dependent on my righteousness. It's the sky, the tree, the eagle, and the sea. It's the feeling in my body when I hold myself with love. It's the salt water beneath me in the float tank, lifting me up with tenderness as I lay there naked with nothing to hide and no voices making demands from the shore. For some reason I muted myself. Krista, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, and you're going to host a Q&A session, a conversation session. I'll leave it to you.
Absolutely. This is your opportunity for an aha moment, as I have started calling them, an Ask Heather anything chance. So if there's something particular about the book that you'd like to hear back from Heather, why don't you use the raise hand feature if speaking out loud is okay with you. If not, feel welcome to message me in the chat and I can relay it to Heather. So in the chat, just make sure you pick my name so that I see it and we don't sort of overwhelm the chat that way. Does anyone have a question for Heather that they would like to ask?
It doesn't have to be just about that passage, by the way. It's open to whatever you want to engage with. If you want to know about the writing process or about why I chose to write what I did, whatever you would like. Ellison, I see you have the first hand.
Do you remember this?
I do, sure.
Can you tell us how this is this a portion of the book? How does this fit with the book now?
Yeah. So that what Ellison is holding up is a little ebook that I wrote called The House That Tenderness Built. And that was really the birth of the tenderness work for me. Tenderness showed up for me really specifically, and I write about it in the book. There's a chapter in the book. It's about 3/4 of the way through. I don't start with that. I kind of bring it in gradually and allow tenderness to be born and then reveal tenderness later on. So tenderness was something that showed up for me very distinctly it was on the anniversary of my mom's death. I was sitting feeling some of the grief of remembering my mom, and then it was like this presence just encouraging me to be tender with myself. And I sat, and this poem just sort of flowed out of me onto the page as I was sitting there in the sunlight at my front window. And that's when the little ebook that you're holding up emerged. And so I when I was writing this book, I wasn't specifically planning to write a whole book about tenderness as a concept. It was going to be a memoir, and tenderness as included. My publishers were the ones that recommended that the Where Tenderness Lives becomes the name, because it's kind of a journey towards tenderness. It's me exploring some of the ways that I've learned not to be tender with myself because of some of the different ways that we've been taught, our social conditioning, from my lineage, from patriarchy, from all of the ways that capitalism, all the ways that we're taught not to be tender with ourselves. I had to explore that first, and then emerging the tenderness. And something I want to say about that I feel like makes this book unique. Like, it's not just a memoir, it's not just a self-help book. I really was intentional about weaving the personal with the systemic, and exploring, like, okay, so if we're not being tender with ourselves, why is that? And it's not just a personal responsibility, it's a collective responsibility. If we have learned to, not be tender with ourselves, it's because we've been taught that we have these voices coming at us from, like, capitalism telling us that our bodies aren't good enough, that we have to buy certain clothes or invest in certain self-care, or do all these things to make our bodies more worthy, or plastic surgery or whatever. We have all of this coming at us. And so I wanted to explore that intersection about what is mine to deal with through therapy, but then what is in the system, in the collective, that we all need to unravel together. And for me, tenderness really feels like a profound kind of countercultural. It's almost an invitation to revolution within the systems that are oppressive and cause harm to us. And so if I learn to treat myself with more tenderness, to hold myself and other people with more tenderness, it helps me not contribute, and really divest myself of those systems that want to oppress and want to cause harm. And so that's a little bit about the narrative of how that's really been working in me and growing, and now ends up with a book called Where Tenderness Lives. So thanks for that question, Allison. Jude, I see your hand next.
Hi, Heather. Congratulations. It's
Thank
great
you.
to witness this new book coming out into the world. And you mentioned in the passage that you shared a shift in your understanding of faith. And I'm wondering, in the process of writing The Art of Holding Space, and then this one on Where Tenderness Lives, could you speak a little bit about how your identity, aside from faith, but your sense of who you are in the world has shifted? Just a little bit of that.
Yeah, it's a big question, because it keeps evolving, and some of you who've been in my workshops will have seen the model I use, where there's the 3 quadrants of kind of our core needs: safety and belonging and identity. And Lorraine made reference to this in her blessing, and identity, I really feel, is tied together with our longing for safety and belonging. And many of us develop a false identity in order to find safety and belonging in the world. And that was one of the things that I unraveled for myself, that some of the ways that I had built my identity was about, how can I ensure that I find safety and belonging? And so the unraveling of that's in this book, the pieces of my marriage dissolving, my leaving the church, those pieces are all kind of about me stepping back from the life that I'd shaped. I was a suburban mom with a good career and going to church. Like, I had this identity that was shaped by all the ways that I was supposed to be living. And then stepping away from that and really asking myself the question, like, who am I? Like, who, and then, discovering, for example, that I am actually queer. I'm not a heterosexual. I built this life that was very heteronormative, but I don't fit in that frame. I don't fit in the particular religious frame I had shaped my life on. There's so many ways that I didn't actually fit, and it felt like the right identity at the time, but But then when I stepped back and asked myself that, I realized that it was different and something new had to emerge. And so that's really what the book is about, is how do I allow that to come through? Like, how do I do not just the trauma healing work that was needed, because that was very much needed, and I did a lot of that work. But then toward the end of the book, when tenderness starts to evolve, I also started to realize, oh, wait a second, like the last chapter is actually about centering joy, because I realized I haven't really figured out how to put joy at the center of my choices, of my identity. Like, what actually brings me joy? How does that show up for me? And so that's what this quest was about too. And some of you have been in the programs that I've developed since then. Know Yourself, Free Yourself, for example, is really about that emergence. And it's been a revolutionary shift. And I mean, it's ended up with me living on Vancouver Island. Like, I kind of disrupted a lot of my life, sold my house and moved across the country. And part of that was, who am I now and what gives me joy and how do I want to center that is as part of the emergence of my own identity. So thank you for that question, Jude. I see Yanni has a hand raised.
Good evening. Congratulations with your book, Heather.
Thank
I was
you.
just taking a fast glance on all the squares, and this about men. I don't have a clear question, but as a man, I found your work very interesting and yeah, in so many ways. Have you any thoughts about men, like, and your work? Yeah.
Well, I should turn the question around and ask you, have you any thoughts on men? How do we bring more men into the conversation? It's been a long question for me, because as long as I've been doing this work and with Krista and others, we've had low numbers of men, and it is hard to draw them in, and we're trying to explore ways to do that, and we'll continue to explore. We have some ideas about developing some programs that more specifically target men. I wish I knew the answer to your question. I don't entirely know. I think part of it has to do with what I talk about in terms of social conditioning. There's a lot of social conditioning for men that tells, and you can speak more to this than I can, but tells men that we're not supposed to talk about feelings. We're supposed to be confident and competent. And, there's this whole narrative about what it means to be a man in our cultures. And a lot of that is not about embracing the emotional side that emerges in circles like this. And so finding the right ways of inviting people in. And I have to say, like yourself and other people, we have men on our team, Yvonne and Nam, we do manage to, like I said to Kristen not that long ago, I said, we don't bring in many men, but almost everyone that shows up is just like a beautiful man. Like there's just, because you've done the work to show up at a circle like this, I just find that there are such rich and beautiful and deeply reflective men that do show up. And so to find more of you would be something that would really bring us delight. But maybe you can offer something to, to help us if there are other men as well. I know there's a couple of you on the call. We do definitely want to invite more in. Anita, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. First, I just want to say I really appreciate your voice in your writing. And so my question's directed towards that. And I know you've referred to the blog that went viral, but I'm just curious, has writing always been a part of your life, or did the writing aspect of what you're doing kind of evolve as you, you know, focused more on the inner quest and that evolution continued? Did the writing also come along, or was that just something you always did because you seem to have such a gift? And I'm curious about that.
Thank you. Yes, I think I've always known that I'm a writer. Like I wouldn't have had the confidence in my teens and 20s necessarily call myself a writer, and some of that there wasn't a space for it, or I was not being necessarily encouraged to be a writer. But I think there was always an inner core in me that knew that I was a writer right from when I was small. I was always writing, and I would like, that was when I was in school, that was my favorite thing to do, is to write stories or write. And when I went to university in my early 20s, I studied English literature and theater. I was writing plays at that time, really kind of imagining myself a playwright. I've written several plays, had a few of them produced on stage actually in my 20s. So yeah, it's always been a part of me. I don't know any other way to be really. Like, if I'm not writing for the public, I'm writing in my journal all the time, because it's just the way that I process the world, and it comes just very naturally for me. It doesn't mean it's not an effort as well. It takes a lot of work, and Krista will tell you how much I hate the editing process. That's not a joy for me all the time. But the writing itself is almost always a joy. Meryl, I see your hand next.
Yes, I wonder what part of your book or the concept of the tenderness did you struggle with the most for yourself in the process, and or to put into words for the book?
What part did I struggle with the most? I think it's I I'd be lying if I didn't say that it's not an ongoing struggle to hold myself in tenderness. Um, just this week, I've been doing it. Just this morning, I had little moments where I still noticed that there were these little voices that were critiquing me, that were not being kind to me. So to shift, to change those internal narratives, I think, is a lifelong process. And on our certification call yesterday, we were all talking about how much we were all self-critiquing. Even, we're all a group of women that are, I don't know, between 30 and 60 maybe, and every one of us is still living this with this voice inside our heads of self-critique and perfectionism. And so yeah, I think that's probably the one that continues, that will probably till the day I die be a part of who I am, is like just not listening to that voice that wants to be a perfectionist and punish me for not doing things right, that internal kind of dialogue. Thank you. Anyone else, or should I read another section? Oh, I see SJ has a hand, and then Kathy.
I'm just wondering how long it actually took you start to finish to get it published. Once you're finished your first chunk of it, how long did the publishing process take?
Well, I think the publishing process took longer than the writing process, to be honest with you. I probably took me about a year to write it, maybe a little longer than that, because it had a couple of iterations. And then I think I first spoke with Trina and the team at Page 2 like in September of 2022, I'm gonna say. So it, like, from publishing to it being in people's hands, with both of my books, this one I think even a little longer. But they're also like, Page 2 is really great at determining what's good timing, and they've got their finger on the pulse in terms of understanding the publishing process. So some of that is their advice about what time of year and things like that to be born. So but the editing process itself took a good year, and then there's so many, it's hard to even describe to people who haven't been in the process, so many different layers to it in terms of decisions about the font on the pages, about the cover design, about the ebook, and I still have to do the audio recording, and like, it's just an incredibly kind of complex and intense process, and which it's so good to work with a publisher who knows the process so well and understands it, but then they also have to get it into the distribution systems and all of that. It's yeah, it is quite a complex process. And I think there's simpler ways of publishing books if people want to do like more of a self-publishing model, they can. But to do at the level of professionalism that Page 2 does it takes quite a bit of effort and a number of people on the team to get it out to the world. Kathy, I see your hand.
Thank you so much, and congratulations. It is such a huge task as you just described. But your writing has so impacted me, and you kind of referenced that personal critique, and I personally also struggle with being a pleaser, other people's opinions. So when you put yourself out so vulnerably, how do you work with that part? Do you get critics, or just kind of that inner work as well? From the inner critic and the outer ones that could discourage your writing, which we certainly do here.
Yeah, there's a multi-pronged answer to that question, because that is an intense thing, again, that doesn't really go away, the self-critique. Like I say, even this week, I still was kind of wrestling with, the little moments of panic about getting a book into the world that's this vulnerable still shows up all the time. It's not like it ever just goes away. You don't magically just become a confident writer that it can write anything or put anything into the world. It's a daily practice of just trusting in it and like having a deep belief in it. And even though, so that when those little voices in my head show up and say, you might be messing up, you might be taking too big of a risk, all those little reminders of what risk I'm taking, etc. It's mostly a practice of that's where tenderness comes in, really, because to learn to hold myself with tenderness and hear those voices and say, I hear you, I understand that you're scared, and I'm not going to stop in this forward motion, and I keep believing in it. So learning a different self-talk, learning to hold space for the complexity of what's going on in your brain. That's part of the answer. That's the personal side of it. But the other part of it is find good people. Like I say, I could not have written this book without Salia being a constant sounding board and then Krista, I cannot even begin to tell you how much she holds space for me and for the work and for the birth of the work. Many of you don't have as much encounter with her directly, and yet she is like an integral part of me having the confidence to be out there doing this work. It's collective. Like I say to so many people, do not try to do this kind of work by yourself. Make sure you find the people that believe in you, even in the moments when you don't believe in yourself, that are going to hold you up. And like I say, Lorraine and Two Bears, when I show up at their home, when I was writing in the backyard, they have a little cottage in their backyard, and Lorraine would just show up at the door. She seemed to intuitively know that I needed a smoothie at 2 p.m. or something, and she would just show up with it there. And so people like that just trust themselves to know how to support you when you're going through that internal wrangling. It's immeasurably good to have that. And I have that in multiple ways, and it's taken time to build that for myself, because there were times when I felt much more isolated in trying to do this work, but I've gradually known I needed that and built the systems to support it.
Heather, there's a question here in the chat from Lee. They say, any tips for holding space for that perfectionist inner voice during writing, which I think you commented on a little bit, but also wondering if you would expand on the process of moving between personal writing and writing a memoir.
Yeah, holding space for that perfectionist voice. Like I say, there's a reason why I kind of have externalized tenderness in this work, because I know that if I'm somewhat a student of internal family systems that talks about your higher self holding space for the voices that are scared, for the inner child. But for me, I also needed a somewhat external layer that I could lean into. And you can use the spiritual language of God or goddess or spirit or something else if that language feels better for you. But when this concept of tenderness evolved, it felt like there was something outside of me that could hold me even when all of the internal voices were not supporting me. And I could just lean into this knowing that there was a source of support and love and kindness for me available. And so that's part of what I would suggest. And it's somewhat in the book, but also download the free ebook I have on heatherplett.com, The House That Tenderness Built. It gives some specific suggestions and journal prompts on learning to hold space for those voices. And then again, the course that we're offering, we're relaunching the program Know Yourself, Free Yourself, which I think is really responsive to a lot of these questions as well. It starts on March 5th. And then what was the second question? Wondering if you could expand on the process of moving between personal writing and writing a memoir. Yeah, like, because many of you have been reading my blogs for a number of years. I early in blogging, I realized that was where my gifts lie in my writing, was personal memoir, personal narrative, personal story, personal essay. And I remember having conversations with different people about that who really helped me see that in myself and see that as a particular gift for myself. And one of the people, my sister-in-law, Sue, I think she may actually be on the call. I saw somebody that might be her. If you're there, Sue, give me a wave. She was one of the people I think named it in me and saying that was a gift that I needed to continue to cultivate. And so I really was being intentional about cultivating that voice and recognizing that's what people responded to most in my writing. And so even when I was writing The Art of Holding Space, my stories was part of it. I couldn't never just write a teaching book. It emerged out of my own stories, because that was where I knew that my unique gift in the world lived. And so it was a fairly natural process for me to move then from that practice that had really honed for a long time on my blog into turning it into a memoir. It didn't feel like a big leap for me. It felt like kind of a natural next thing. And I'm already beginning to create in my mind. I haven't put on paper yet, but the next book will also be memoir based. That in a couple of years we'll be meeting again on another call for the next book. So yeah, it just feels like that's what emerges out of me. Pasha, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was actually, congratulations, firstly. I hope that our book is arriving tomorrow in the Netherlands, which is really quickly. So, but anyway, I was just, curious also about what's next for you then. But I hear that there's already another book in store. But also, I can imagine that this is like you're building up toward this moment and the launch and everything, and then what happens next? What's next?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that happens next is I really spend time enjoying the place where I've moved to. I've moved to Vancouver Island. Some of you have been following my journey. I've been nomadic for 16 months, and now I've landed on Vancouver Island, and I really want to explore and discover this new home that I've chosen. So I really want to turn some of my attention towards that now that the book is launched. I have intentions around doing an actual physical book tour. So people in the US and in Canada, I'm gonna head towards Winnipeg because I have to gather my things that I've left in a storage unit in Winnipeg. So I'm going to do a drive probably through the States on the way there and then back through Canada. So if you happen to be on that route somewhere, I'm looking for places to actually do book events and bookstores or whatever is along the road. And then I really want to continue to develop this work on tenderness. I want to do more gatherings and more exploration of what this concept, what this practice is, because I think it's really going to generate some beautiful things. I'm looking forward to that, the generation that comes from it. Krista and I have been talking about some development of things like a leadership program that's rooted in tenderness, a tender leader kind of learning. And then, yeah, there's another book that's already starting to kind of poke at me. And that will be in particular about this kind of 1.5 process of meandering the nomadic journey to find the next home for myself. There's something in there that will probably emerge as another book. I think I'm going to shift into, we had intended to do a breakout room, but I'm thinking we're not going to have time for that. But I do want to do one more short reading from the book, and then we'll have a bit more conversation before we close, and we'll do the draw at the end. And so I'm going to pull out the book, and this is you've been asking for. Somebody asked about the tenderness piece, how that lands in the book. And so I'm going to read the beginning of that chapter called Becoming Tender. It's chapter 10 in the book. Your body's energy feels quite guarded, like you're protecting yourself from something. A massage therapist once told me a few years ago when I was nearing burnout from my work and knew I needed to take better care of myself. To put it frankly, her assessment pissed me off because I was doing a lot of work, writing and hosting retreats that involved considerable vulnerability on my part. And I often felt like I was overly unguarded, allowing too many people access to me. I wasn't sure how much more unguarded I could be. It took a long time for me to understand the wisdom of what she'd offered. It was true that I was giving a lot of myself away in my writing and teaching work in ways that felt vulnerable and generous. It was also true that my nervous system was almost always at least somewhat guarded against real or perceived threats. Every time I'd put something vulnerable into the world, as I do regularly on my blog and social media and in workshops, I'd brace for attack. Share, brace, share, brace. That had become the nature of my work and life. Sometimes I was tempted to shut it down completely and go back to traditional employment, but by then the work had become so important to me and felt so much like a calling that I wasn't willing to stop. Instead of running away, I had to change how I showed up. Firstly, I had to learn better boundaries. And secondly, I had to find the kind of healing that would help my body feel like she didn't have to brace for attack all the time. I started taking longer periods of time away from the work and entrusting more of the work to my business partner and our team. When I took breaks from work, I'd stay off social media entirely, since that was often the space where I felt most vulnerable to attack. Whenever I was triggered, I'd turn to the practices that soothed me: journal writing, walking, somatic therapy, havening touch, or Epsom salt baths. Those practices were helping, but they weren't helping enough. I needed something deeper that wouldn't just give me tools to deal with the temporary flooding of my nervous system, but would help me heal the longer-term guardedness that was in my body from so many years of trauma overload, what's often referred to as CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. When things got particularly bad and I found myself in a conflict that escalated because I reacted poorly during a triggering situation, I started therapy again. That's when I discovered how old some of the trauma in my body was, like the constriction in my throat that I wrote about in the chapter about my rape. It's also when I admitted to myself how much trauma had been impacting my relationships throughout my entire life. The massage therapist wasn't wrong about the guardedness. I'd been resisting intimacy because of what it triggered in my body. After a few months of regular therapy sessions, on a day when I told my therapist I didn't have much to talk about because life was going well, I found myself talking once again of my body's distrust of joy. I told him about how I'd spent a lovely afternoon wandering alone on a nearly deserted beach, and how I'd started the drive home feeling blissful, but suddenly my mind started needlessly ruminating over an old conflict that had been disruptive to a relationship. I could think of nothing that brought the old conflict back to the surface, since I hadn't thought about it in quite some time, and there was no reason to think about it now. But there it was, disturbing my contentment. I asked my therapist to help me explore why I couldn't stay in the blissful feeling I'd had at the beach and why my brain tried to sabotage my contentment. "Do you trust the joy?" he asked. I don't think I do, I said. It makes me feel too vulnerable, like someone will take it away from me. I think I sabotage it so that I have control over the loss of it. And maybe I punish myself for having joy because I don't believe I'm truly worthy of it. What could you have done in that moment when the spiraling started to return to the peace you felt at the beach, he asked. Is there a way for you to communicate to your body that it is still safe, that nobody will cause you harm when you are joyful? At this point, I was standing. My therapy sessions, which happen via Zoom, always involve some somatic exercises as my therapist helps me pay careful attention to what my body needs. As I stood there, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what would have helped my body as I drove back from the beach. I started to sway, and the motion reminded me of the waves at the beach. I think I can bring back the feeling of the waves, I said. In the waves, I have learned to feel safe and happy, even when I'm not fully grounded. I can choose to bring my body back there, even when I'm not physically there. I realized as I stood there that my breath was flowing like the waves, just as my body was, in and out, advance and recede, advance and recede. Breath could be the portal that would bring my body back to the beach. Breath could remind me that I was both liminal and grounded. Breath could bring tenderness into my body. All right. So shall we, Krista, I'm inviting you back into the conversation. Should we just open up for a bit more questions instead of tempting breakout rooms? That feel?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And it'll give me a chance to get everybody's name in my little picker wheel here too.
Okay. All right. Is there anyone else that wants to offer something, either a question or the other thing I wanted to offer? As I mentioned earlier, we are relaunching the program Know Yourself, Free Yourself, starting March 5th. And I know there's a number of people that are on the call that have taken that program. Know Yourself, Free Yourself is really it was merging simultaneously with the book. Actually, I was writing the book and creating the course kind of at the same time. The book was my personal excavation of some of those narratives and some of the like the lineage part and the social conditioning and all of that. And simultaneously, this course, Know Yourself, Free Yourself, was being born as an invitation for you to do the same work. And so I developed that at the same time. And so if, as you're reading the book, you want to do that exploration for yourself, that's a really great place to do it. And I welcome if there's a few people that have taken the course that want to offer anything about their experience with the course, they're welcome to speak into the circle as well. So Mary, I see your hand.
I have a question, actually. It's not quite what you were inviting, but I have a question about something I really appreciate in your book is or sharing your story, the reader to explore their own stories each chapter. And I'm curious, I'm just curious, were any of those questions particularly hard to come up with or easy to come up with, or like, can you talk to us about your process of when you were, part of this book is you're telling, you're really sharing your stories, but then you're also inviting us to explore our own stories. I'm just curious about that aspect, which is something very unique. Not many books really want to accompany the reader in their own experience. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, thank you for that question, because it actually wasn't there in the first iteration of the book. I was writing it more as purely memoir. And so when I presented it to page 2, that's what I was presenting was a memoir. And it was page 2 that encouraged me to think more expansively to invite the readers into the conversation, because some of their reflection was that was the work I was already doing with Art of Holding Space and with the Center for Holding Space. And so they thought that was a natural thing, and they just saw the value of it in the book. And so I started to add those questions then when I started editing the book, and realized the wisdom of what they were offering me as the editors and publishers. And I think it's just such a natural part of how I function. Like, as long as I've been doing this work, I've always been both a storyteller and a story catcher, in the words of Christina Baldwin, one of my teachers, in terms of holding space for the stories of other people. Like, I don't ever want to just be a solitary storyteller. I want to be in circles of people telling stories and emerging truths. And so my work is just by its very nature is collective work. So it like, that's why I wanted other people to be in that with me and in the exploration with me. And so it felt natural to invite that as I was writing it. And yeah, so that's a little bit about the trajectory of that decision. Ellison, I see your hand, and then Salia, and then Pasha.
Hey, Heather, I'm very excited about this. So I do have it. I haven't started reading it yet, but it just arrived. So looking forward to it. Forgive I'll try to see if I can wrap my mouth around the question that's in my head. You mentioned before about perfectionism, and it made me think about how much I value, because I've done a lot of workshops with you. And one of the things that I've really valued is the high quality of the work that you put into it, but also the beauty and just how things are put together. I mean, there's a lot of care that you put into these things, and thought and skill and all of that. So I think the word is maybe craftsmanship or craftswomanship or whatever we want to call it. And I just wondered maybe if you could comment a little bit on the difference between being a perfectionist and yet having that sense of high quality and wanting to create amazing experiences. And maybe a little bit on what are you learning to let go of around that perfectionism part?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that question, because I think you're nailing something really well in the words that you're using, because you're right. I do love to create quality experiences, and I work really, really hard at a lot of people on this call have been in some of my programs, and people like you. There's not many programs I've offered that you haven't signed up for and flown across the country for. So I'm always so moved by people like yourself who just keep showing up again and again, assuming I still have another layer to offer you in the quest. So I think that you use the word care, and I think that really feels true for me. Like, I pour a lot of care into what I develop, but then there's a part of me that has to let go and trust. And that's the point where I'm letting go of perfectionism. Like, I create as much as I can, but then I have to release control of the outcome. And that's part of, those of you who've taken the holding space practice with training, you know about the importance of releasing attachment to outcome is really pivotal to this work. It's like, okay, I can create something beautiful, and then if I let go of what actually happens, so that something beautiful, magical can happen in the space, so something spontaneous can emerge, so that the group itself can shape what's going to show up in the space, then I'm letting go of the perfectionism that wants to control it. And that's a deep and lifelong practice of releasing and holding things with an open hand. And so that's how I do my best to show up with the work. It's like, here's a gift that I can offer you. Here's something really meaningful. And now whatever happens to it may not be perfect. And we're going to be in that kind of messy beauty together of allowing that emergence. So yeah, that feels like a really important practice for us all to learn, of that, of holding it close in a caring way, and then releasing it in a generous way as well. A few more hands. Salia, see your hand.
Yes. Hi, Heather. I think my question or comment is related to stories, what Mary said. And I think, like, you shared a lot of stories in this book, and we believe that stories has to do, like, they come in layers, right? So your understanding right now and what you shared with us in this book, does it reflect your understanding now about the story? And if that changes in the future, are you going to write about that? Or I'm not suggesting anything, but I'm just saying. So yeah.
Well, I mean, as you know more than anyone, my stories keep evolving and emerging, and the way I tell those stories gets different. And as I heal my relationship to the story or my relationship to the people in the story, it just keeps evolving. And with my first book, I often kind of joke that I wish I'd been able to write it on Velcro pages so that I could take some pages out and put new pages in sometimes so that it could keep evolving, because that is one of the difficulties of putting a book into print that's going to live on people's shelves in print in a version of what it was, how it lived in me at that point in my life. And a few years from now, it's not going to live the same way in me. And I had to kind of just let go of that and say, you know what it was at that point in my life. And it was as good as it could be. And that was my relationship to the story at that point in my life. Yes, it's going to change, and I'll write other books, and I may tell these same stories in a different way a few years from now. And that's okay. That's some of the letting go of perfectionism that was in Ellison's story as well. It's like, that is okay. That's just telling the story of an evolving life.
That's right.
And so I try to hold that when I read other people's stories, I try to hold that similarly, allowing them to keep evolving and emerging. Like if you read somebody's story right now, do not expect them to be in the same place 5 years from now. If you read what somebody posts on social media today, don't assume 5 years from now that that's still true for them, that that's still alive in them, because we all get to be emerging and evolving people. And so that's having a different relationship with the story and not expecting it to live and be cast in stone.
Yeah, thank you.
Pasha is next.
Yeah, and just adding to what you just said, it's also in us, it's also in relationships, right? If you don't expect the person you're across from today to be the same person you're across from in a couple of years. I think you know what I mean. I just want to, because you were asking about the Know Yourself, Free Yourself course, and the way that tenderness travels along with us, with me at least, here in the Netherlands. So we had the advanced workshop in November, and I bought Tenderness after the workshop. So this is really, it may be, well, it's kind of joy as well. But the thing is that it sits on my couch or on my bed or on my shelf, and it reminds me, because I see it all the time, it reminds me to be tender with myself. So for me, it's just like an external reminder of being tender with myself. So this really helps me. So I just wanted to offer the idea of having something that reminds you of tenderness, so that you get and place it somewhere so that you can be reminded of how to be tender with yourself. So that's my story. Thank you.
I love that. Thank you. And I meant to bring it and have it on my desk. Those of you who've been in my workshops, especially in Europe, will have seen that I now have a little stuffed owl that I carry with me. And that owl is actually in representation of Randy, because when Randy was dying, I asked him how he would come back to me after he had died and what shape he might come. And he said he would come as an owl. And so I bought myself a stuffed owl that I always travel with and I often use in circles. So that's one of my representations of tenderness as well, as having that present for me as a support. Emily has the next hand.
Thanks, Heather, and hi, everybody. My question was along the same lines of what Zalia just talked about, the evolution that you have, Heather, where I know that in the background you've changed and the ideas change and the concepts kind of grow and change. So when you had asked for comments on going through the Know Yourself, Free Yourself program, I thought about how was that for me? And that's coming up on 2 years. And my comment would have been that learning for me was just an initial start. It was just a nudge to start asking, being aware of even what questions were possible to ask, or being aware of things I just couldn't dive into before. So now I think coming up on 2 years is where I'm finally seeing some answers to those questions, but I think I had to sit with them for a couple of years. So I was just kind of commenting on the not one and done and the not fast work of this nature of what we do in this book and in the Know Yourself, Free Yourself program. And I know you've experienced that too. So I was going to see if you wanted to comment on that some more.
Yeah, I've sometimes said that I wish I could be in courses for a couple of years with people or something. Like I wish that, and there isn't, it's hard to get people to pay for a program that's a few years long. We do have people that in our certification program end up with us for a couple of years, and like yourself, who stay in the work for years and years and then become part of our team. And because that's the juiciness. Like I hear from people so often 2 years later that a course is still growing in them. That's something that they unraveled in the circle is becoming more and more alive and more true a few years down the line. And that feels so true for me and for the work and for the conversations and for our relationships. And Pasha made reference to even relationships continue to evolve. And so in the book, there's one chapter, the first chapter is about my mom, and my mom has been dead now over 10 years. And I, even as I was writing that chapter, my relationship with her was continuing to evolve. And a few years from now, I can write a very different chapter about my mom, even though she's been dead all this time. Same thing with my dad, like that continues to evolve. And so that feels really generative for me. And I love to be alongside people as they keep doing that work. And I'm seeing someone like Brenda as well. Brenda, you and I have co-taught so many times in the Netherlands, and being alongside you as you've gone deeper and deeper and deeper into this work to the point where you're now like taking more and more of the leadership and doing workshops and witnessing it growing in you. And I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot, but I think that I get to be alongside that and watch that evolution a few years down the line. Just feels so incredibly honoring to me to be able to witness that, but also meaningful to witness that. And I know others, like you've got to watch me evolve as well. And so it's never just an 8-week course. Like Know Yourself for Yourself is an 8-week course. And some people come back the second and third time because they want to just go a little deeper and a little deeper. And so yeah, it's a kind of an ongoing commitment to this deeper learning. Tammy, I see your hand.
Hi, Heather. I really, congratulations on this book. And I'm just reminded being here in a circle with you, how amazing it feels. And so I want to speak to the Know Yourself, Free Yourself, because I have a unique perspective in that I was helping as a guardian on the call. And but when you were doing that, I'm still actually going and doing the material. So I was learning as well as I was helping you with that. And a particular incident that happened near the end of the course where I was in a different circle and I was given an assignment, a writing assignment that really triggered me very badly, this particular writing assignment. And I was in what was supposed to be a quote unquote BIPOC, for people who don't know, Black, Indigenous, people of color container. And I was completely sort of traumatized around it. And lo and behold, I was coming to the end of Heather's Know Yourself, Free Yourself course. And the assignment was literally almost the exact same writing thing that I was supposed to do. But within Heather's container of Know Yourself, Free Yourself, there was so much more context about with it. And there was so much more permission to make it my own. That I couldn't believe that the universe was bringing this whole triggering situation to me, but yet I encountered it within Heather's course as someone who was helping with the course. And I was able to write out probably what was one of the most second meaningful pieces of writing for myself in my life. And the first one was in your open-hearted writers retreat in Canada years before. And so I just want to tell people that I know Heather really sort of has championed more brave space over safe space. But for me, when I am feeling safe, that makes me brave. And you do that, you do that. Being here in this circle makes me miss it so much. And you know, my work in retirement has taken me in a different direction. So I haven't been able to be in circles with you as much. But I just wanted to speak to you. You just can't go wrong being in a course and in community and circle with Heather. So thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. That was so moving. And you're another one of those people that I get the privilege of walking alongside and witnessing you grow and stand more and more in your story and in your offering and your gift. And as Tammy said, she hasn't been in the circles for a while. And that's one of the things that was really important actually to Krista and I is like, we embrace people in our programs and then we want to witness them grow into themselves, not be overly entwined in our work so that they can't go off and do what they're called to do. We want to be a launching pad for people to also go in and do their own thing. And so with Tammy, like to stay in this relationship has been so important to me, and to have had you in the community for these years and then continue to grow alongside you just feels really, really juicy for me. And I know that there will continue to be intersections between us because I see this beautiful work emerging from you as well, and that excites me. Thank you. Well, we're reaching the end of the call, and I don't want to leave without doing a draw. Krista, shall I pass it to you to announce what we're giving away and then the winners? Right, and she's offered the link to Know Yourself, Free Yourself. I really hope that you join us, and I'll pass it to you, Krista, to explain also.
So we are offering a special little deal for Know Yourself, Free Yourself. If you use the coupon code LAUNCH, you'll get $49 off any of the 3 levels. So you can join us for as little as $200 for all 8 lessons. So that's pretty exciting. I'm just going to pop that in the chat here. Launch. It's good until next week, Tuesday. So you've got a week to take advantage of that. If you would like to join us for that, we would love to have you. So the other thing we would like to do is do a few giveaways. I've got everyone's name here in my draw, except for the people on our team. I'm sorry, you get access to Heather all the time, so you don't qualify for the draw. Sorry. This is for everybody else. So let me just do a little shuffling here. I'm going to spin my picker wheel and we will do the draw first for a signed copy of Heather's book. And our winner is, that was a long spin. Oh man. Allison, Alllyson. Congratulations, Allison. And you're in Winnipeg, so I'm going to hand deliver it to you. So yes.
I saw the other Ellison cheering, but it's the Ellison with a Y.
Sorry. Aw, sorry,
I'm
Allison.
cheering for the other Allison. It's okay.
Okay.
Okay, so the next one will be for a free spot in our Know Yourself, Free Yourself program. And if you get picked and you've taken it before, you're welcome to take it again, or you can have access to one of our other online programs. So let's see who's going to get that. Donna. Is Donna still here? Did she leave? Donna? Is Donna here?
There was a Donna Lynn's iPhone on the last page, and
I think she's
I see Donna's. She's signed in on the video, or sorry, she signed in on the call, but not with her video on.
I see.
Muted. Yeah.
Okay, Donna, if you hear me, send
Oh,
me
you're just
your
muted, Donna. I can see you. Hello.
Hi, Donna. You're muted. Donna, send me an email and I will get you all sorted out. Perfect. It's info@centerforholdingspace.com. I will look forward to hearing from you.
Welcome to the program, Don.
Welcome to the program. Okay, so then the next big prize is a coaching session with Heather. So that's super exciting because she hasn't done one of those in a long, long time.
They're rare.
They are rare. They have become rare. So this one's really special. Kristen. Where is Kristen?
Kristen, where are you?
Kristen, is she still here?
I think she left. Is that Kristen
Okay,
from
well,
Netherlands?
we'll have to do another draw then, because you got to be here to win. That's my rule. So let's spin again. But Kristen, if you watch this later, reach out to me and I will give you a compensatory prize. Oh, guess who's getting it? It's Chara.
Chara, you get to coach with me.
Yay, lucky Chara.
Yay, that's fantastic. Oh my
That'll
goodness.
be fun.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We are at just past the bottom of the hour. We won't take any more of your time. Thank you so much for celebrating this book with us, for being here, for being invested in our work. Heather, is there anything else you wanted to say?
I was going to say, normally when we're in circle together, we do a checkout if people want to leave something behind, something about what they received from the call. So if you want to do that in the chat before you exit, you can feel free to do that, but you're also welcome to simply leave the room. But thank you so much. As I said earlier, I'm just so honored to have you all with me today. And I look forward to hearing your feedback about the book. Please share it. It really is very, very helpful. A couple of things. If you share on social media to help boost the book itself, if you offer reviews, reviews really help elevate it in the algorithms. Like, so if you share a review on Amazon or Goodreads or any of those places where there's book reviews, that helps boost it and make it more visible to other people. So other people see that the book's available, and it helps people decide to buy it. So know that every little bit of support is really valued in getting a book like this out into the world and more people to see it. So thank you in advance of any support you offer. And if anybody, also the other thing is, if you know people hosting podcasts that might be interested, we'll be doing a whole publicity around it. So any ideas like that, or if you know people that you can just put a bug in their ear, let them know to reach out to me. That's also really great and helpful. Thank you so much.
And stay tuned, because we're going to come up with a podcast soon too. So stay tuned for more information about that.
Right. We meant to be further along in the planning than we are. We haven't gotten it quite planned yet, but that is in the works. We're going to do it.
Heather, I'm leaving with your book.
Yay!
Yay!
And congratulations.
Enjoy.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. I finally